Target is moving. 4 clicks out. I repeat, target is outside the kill box. The radio static hissed in the freezing mountain air, cutting through the heavy breathing of the SEAL team leader, Master Chief Miller. His voice was ragged, desperate. Command, we can't touch him. We are pinned down by heavy machine gun fire, requesting air support immediately. Negative, Viper 1. Airspace is denied. You are on your own. A pause. Then, a calm, soft voice, almost childlike in its timbre, broke into the chaotic frequency. I have a visual. Miller scoffed, the sound sharp over the comms. Vance, don't be stupid. You're at the nest. That's nearly 4,000 meters away. Your rifle isn't a howitzer. Wind is 7 miles per hour. Full value left to right. Coriolis effect calculated. Humidity 40%. The voice remained terrifyingly flat. Belay that, Vance. It's impossible. You'll give away our position for a missed shot, Miller shouted. Flight time, 6.2 seconds. Vance, stand down. That is a direct order. He's 3.8 kilometers away. Click. The safety disengaged. A sound loud enough to echo in the earpiece. Sending it. Silence. The wind on the tarmac at Bagram Airfield was not just cold. It was abrasive, carrying grit that scoured the skin. CWO2 Elara Vance stood by the open ramp of the C-130 Hercules, adjusting the strap of her drag bag. It was nearly as tall as she was. At 4 feet, 11 inches, Elara didn't look like a soldier. She looked like a clerical error. Hey, Tinkerbell! A voice boomed from inside the fuselage. You sure you checked that bag as carry-on? Might cost extra for oversized luggage. Laughter rippled through the squad of SEALs gearing up on the benches. It was Master Chief Miller. A man built like a vending machine with a beard, occupying 2 seats worth of space. He didn't look up from his magazine check, but the smirk was audible. Elara didn't flinch. She was used to this. The cute nicknames, the skepticism, the assumption that she was a PR stunt or a diversity quota hire. She hoisted the 50-pound Chetak M200 intervention rifle case onto her shoulder with a deceptive ease that came from core strength, not bulk. It's checked, Master Chief, Elara said, her voice cool, devoid of the irritation he wanted to provoke. Just make sure your team doesn't trip over it when you're running for cover. The laughter died down, replaced by a few low whistles. Miller looked up then, his eyes narrowing. He didn't like pushback, especially not from support personnel who looked like they should be in high school. Listen to me, Vance. Miller stood up, looming over her. The height difference was comical, almost 2 feet. He had to angle his neck down sharply. This isn't a range day. We are hitting the Obsidian Ridge. Oxygen is thin, terrain is vertical, and the enemy doesn't give a damn about your marksmanship badges. If you lag behind, I leave you behind. I don't have the manpower to carry you. I don't recall asking for a ride, Elara replied, locking eyes with him. Her irises were a pale, icy gray, unblinking. We need a shooter who can hump 100 pounds of gear up a 40-degree incline, Miller continued, stepping closer, invading her personal space. Not someone who needs a booster seat to see over the parapet. You stay in the rear. You cover our 6. If I hear you on the comms, unless you're dying, I'll have your trident. Wait, you don't have one. He turned his back on her, dismissing her existence. Load up, boys. Wheels up in 5. Elara watched them file past. Big men, strong men, loud men. They moved with the heavy, thumping confidence of those who believed size equaled survivability. She adjusted her grip on her rifle case. Inside was a weapon capable of killing a man from a distance where he wouldn't even hear the shot until he was already dead. She climbed the ramp last, finding a small corner near the hydraulic distinct. She closed her eyes, visualizing the map of the complex they were heading toward. It was a labyrinth of steel and concrete buried in the mountains. Let them talk, she thought, the vibration of the engines starting to hum through the metal floor. Big targets are just easier to hit. Miller didn't know it yet, but the mission parameters were wrong. The intel was incomplete. And where they were going, his size wouldn't be an asset, it would be a liability. The ramp closed, sealing them in darkness. The red tactical lights flickered on, painting the interior in the color of blood. Elara checked her watch. Zulu time. The countdown had begun. The ramp of the C-130 dropped open again, but this time, the world outside was a screaming void of black wind, 30,000 feet. The air was thin enough to boil blood if the pressure suits failed. Elara checked her oxygen mask, the hiss of the regulator the only sound in her ears. The red light turned green. Go! 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 The seals vanished into the abyss one by one, dark shapes swallowed by the night. Elara stepped to the edge. The wind tore at her petite frame, threatening to toss her like a rag doll before she even jumped. She tightened her grip on her harness, the heavy rifle case strapped to her leg, acting as a bizarre, weighted anchor. She leaned forward and let gravity take her. The freefall was violent. She plummeted through the freezing layers of the atmosphere, her body rigid, fighting the turbulence. At 4,000 feet, she pulled the cord. The canopy snapped open with a bone-jarring crack, wrenching her shoulders. She checked her wrist altimeter and scanned the darkness below through her NVGs. The world was a grainy green wash of jagged peaks and deep, unforgiving valleys. She landed hard on a rocky scree slope, rolling instantly to disperse the momentum. The rifle case slammed into the shale, but she absorbed the impact, coming to a crouch, with her sidearm drawn. Silence returned, heavy and oppressive. Sound off! Miller's voice crackled in her earpiece. Viper 2, good. Viper 3, good. Viper 4, good. Vance? Miller's tone was already impatient. Support is on deck, Elara whispered, checking the seal on her rifle case. Moving to rally point. Double time. We're burning daylight, even if there isn't any. The rally point was 2 kilometers uphill, across terrain that looked like the surface of Mars. The seals, with their longer strides and brute muscular endurance, moved like mountain goats. Elara had to exert twice the energy for every step they took. Her boots slid on the loose gravel, and the 50-pound rifle felt like it was gaining weight with every meter. She gritted her teeth, sweat already pooling at the base of her spine despite the sub-zero temperature. She could see the heat signatures of the team ahead through her thermal overlay, pulling away from her. A gap was forming. 10 meters. 20. Support! Close it up, Miller barked. You're lagging. Copy, she gasped, forcing her burning quadriceps to drive harder. She didn't complain. She didn't ask them to slow down. That was the trap. If she asked, she proved them right. The terrain shifted from loose scree to massive boulders. The seals vaulted over a 6-foot ledge, one pulling the other up. When Elara reached it, she was alone at the bottom. The ledge was a foot higher than her head. She looked up. Miller was standing at the top, looking down. The green glow of his NVGs made him look like a judging demon. Need a hand, little girl? It wasn't an offer. It was a taunt. Elara holstered her weapon, jammed her boot into a small fissure in the rock face, and launched herself upward. She caught the edge of the rock with her fingertips, her gloves scraping against the stone. With a grunt of pure exertion, she hauled herself up, swinging her leg over the lip and rolling onto the plateau. She stood up instantly, chest heaving but face masked by her gear. "Negative, Master Chief," she said, her voice steady over the comms. "I'm good." Miller stared at her for a second longer than necessary, then turned away. "Eyes open. We're crossing into the red zone. The complex is just over this ridge." They moved forward, the silence of the mountains amplifying the tension. Elara fell into the rear guard position, her eyes scanning the cliffs above them. The wind howled through the passes, sounding like distant screams. Something felt wrong. The intel said this area was lightly patrolled, a blind spot in the warlord's defenses. But as Elara scanned the ridgeline, she noticed a discrepancy in the rock formation, a shadow that didn't move with the shifting moonlight. "Hold," she whispered. "What now, Vance?" Miller hissed. "Thermal anomaly at 11 o'clock high, 300 meters. "I don't see anything," Miller replied, checking his own optics. "It's a rock heated by the sun from earlier. Keep moving." "It's too uniform for a rock," Elara insisted, unslinging her rifle. "I'm telling you, it's a hide." "We don't have time for your paranoia. We are behind schedule because of the hike. Move out." Miller signaled the team forward. They stepped out from the cover of the boulders onto the exposed trail leading to the main gates. Elara didn't move. She dropped to a knee, bringing her scope up. The rock shifted. A barrel emerged. "Contact front," she screamed, breaking radio discipline. But it was too late. The night erupted in muzzle flashes. The ambush was textbook. A wall of lead slammed into the ground where the SEALs had been standing milliseconds before. The crack thump of high-caliber rounds hitting rock filled the air, deafening and chaotic. "Contact! Contact right! Take cover!" Miller roared, his voice nearly drowned out by the chatter of a DSHK heavy machine gun tearing up the ridge. The team scattered, diving behind the sparse cover of boulders and depressions in the earth. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the granite, sending deadly stone shrapnel spraying into the air. Elara was already prone, her body pressed flat into the dirt behind a low shelf of rock. She could feel the concussive force of the impacts vibrating through her chest. "Viper 3 is hit! I repeat, 3 is down!" came the frantic call from Viper 2. "Pop smoke! Get suppression on that ridge!" Miller screamed. The SEALs returned fire, their suppressed carbines coughing rhythmically, but it was like throwing pebbles at a thunderstorm. The enemy had the high ground, superior numbers, and entrenched positions. They were in a kill box, a fatal funnel designed to grind attacking forces into dust. Elara shimmied forward, sliding her rifle through a gap in the rocks. Through her scope, the world slowed down. She saw the muzzle flash of the machine gun nest. It was well fortified, protected by sandbags and a narrow firing slit. A direct assault was suicide. "Command, this is Viper 1. We are pinned. Requesting immediate CAS," Miller yelled into the radio. "Negative, Viper 1. The response was immediate and cold. "Anti-air batteries are active in your sector. No air support available. You need to break contact or push through." "Push through? We can't even lift our heads." Miller slammed his fist against the ground. The enemy fire intensified. RPGs began to streak down from the cliffs, exploding dangerously close to the team's position. The dust and smoke choked the air, reducing visibility to near zero. Elara pulled back from her scope. She scanned the perimeter of the massive steel gates blocking the valley entrance. They were welded shut, reinforced with concrete. But 20 meters to the left of the gate, near the base of the cliff, she saw something. It was a small, rusted grate, barely visible behind a cluster of scrub brush. Steel steam was venting from it in rhythmic puffs, a geothermal exhaust port. "Master Chief?" Elara keyed her mic, her voice calm amidst the bedlam. "I have a potential ingress point. 9 o'clock, low." "Not now, Vance. Look at it. It's an exhaust vent. It bypasses the gate." Miller peered around his cover, flinching as a bullet sparked inches from his face. He saw the grate. He looked at it, then looked at his massive armored frame. Then he looked at the rest of his team. "That thing is 12 inches wide, maybe 14, Miller spat. "None of us can fit in there. We'd get stuck before we got our shoulders in." "I can fit," Elara said. The firing paused for a split second as the enemy reloaded, a heavy, ominous silence falling over the valley. "You?" Miller looked at her. Really looked at her, for the first time since the mission began. He saw the small frame he had mocked, the narrow shoulders, the lack of bulk. "I can get inside," Elara continued, her eyes fixed on his. "I can flank them, disable the heavy weapon, or open the gate from the rear." "It's suicide," Miller shook his head. "You'll be alone inside a fortified complex with zero backup. If you get caught, you're dead. Or worse." "If we stay here, we're all dead," she countered. An RPG struck the rock face above them, showering them with debris. "Make a decision, Miller. Do you want to die on this rock, or do you want to win?" Miller gritted his teeth, the veins in his neck bulging. He hated this. He hated relying on the support. He hated sending a woman alone into the dark. But he was a pragmatist. He looked at his wounded man, bleeding out in the dirt. "Cover her!" Miller bellowed, swinging his rifle back toward the ridge. "Lay down everything you've got. Vance, move! You have 5 seconds!" The SEALs unleashed a torrent of suppressive fire, a desperate wall of noise to keep the enemy heads down. Elara didn't hesitate. She shed her heavy pack, keeping only her rifle, her sidearm, and a bandolier of ammunition. She sprinted across the open ground, her small form a blur in the smoke. Bullets kicked up dirt at her heels. She dove, sliding the last few feet, and slammed into the rusted grate. It was hot to the touch. She kicked it once, twice. The bolts rusted through, gave way. The grate clattered inward. She looked back once. Miller was watching her, his expression unreadable behind the night vision goggles. "Go," he whispered over the comms. Elara pushed herself into the dark, steaming hole. The heat hit her instantly, smelling of sulfur and old grease. The darkness swallowed her whole. She was in. The moment Elara slid past the threshold of the grate, the world shrank to a 14-inch circle of rusted steel. The heat was instantaneous and physical, a heavy blanket that wrapped around her throat. This wasn't just a ventilation shaft. It was a geothermal exhaust bypass. The air inside was stagnant, smelling of rotten eggs and metallic dust, hovering around a suffocating 45 degrees Celsius. She lay on her stomach, the darkness absolute until she flipped her night vision goggles down. The green phosphor display flared, revealing a tunnel that stretched endlessly into the mountain's gut, ribbed with rivets that promised to tear skin. "Vance? Status?" Miller's voice crackled in her ear, distorted by the layers of rock and steel between them. "I'm in," she whispered, her voice sounding boomingly loud in the confined space. "It's tight." That was an understatement. The tunnel was so narrow that her shoulders brushed the sides with every movement. A standard SEAL operator, with their broad chests and plate carriers, would have wedged tight in the first meter. Even for her, at 4'11" and 100 pounds, it was a coffin fit. She reached back and tugged on the drag bag. The CWO2 M200 intervention inside was 53 inches long, longer than the tunnel was wide. She couldn't wear it on her back. She couldn't push it in front. She had tied it to her ankle with a quick-release webbing. It was a dead weight, an anchor threatening to pull her back out. "Moving," she grunted. She began the crawl, left elbow, right knee, right elbow, left knee. It was a slow, agonizing rhythm. The rivets dug into her forearms, shredding the fabric of her combat shirt. The dust on the floor of the pipe was thick, kicking up into a choking cloud with every inch she gained. She couldn't cough. There wasn't enough air to waste on spasms. 5 minutes in, 10 meters. The heat was seeping through her tactical pants, burning her knees. Sweat ran down her face, stinging her eyes, pooling in the seal of her goggles. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the sound amplified by the metal tube until it sounded like a drum. "Don't think about the tons of rock above you," she told herself. "Don't think about the fact that you can't turn around." "Vance." Miller's voice was fainter now, static eating the edges of his words. "We are holding. Take in heavy. Hurry." "Working on it," she breathed. The tunnel banked sharply to the right, a 90-degree turn. Elara froze. The radius of the turn was tiny. She could bend her body, sure, but the rifle bag trailing behind her was a rigid object. She stopped, her breath hitching. If the rifle got stuck in the bend, she was trapped. She couldn't go forward without it, and she couldn't back up to free it. She twisted her body, contorting her spine in a way that made her joints pop, reaching back to grab the drag strap with her hand. She had to guide the nose of the bag around the corner manually. "Come on, you heavy bastard," she hissed through gritted teeth. She pulled. The bag snagged on a rivet. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to spike through the heat. If she was stuck here, nobody would come for her. Miller couldn't fit. She would die of dehydration in the dark, just a few 100 feet from the enemy. Calm down. Physics. It's just physics. She exhaled fully, emptying her lungs to make her ribcage smaller, granting herself an extra half-inch of maneuvering room. She shimmied backward, risking getting wedged, until her hand could reach the snag. Her fingers, slick with sweat and grime, found the tear in the bag where it had caught metal. She ripped the fabric free, the sound tearing like a scream in the silence. She pulled again. The rifle slid around the bend. Elara gasped, inhaling the hot, stale air greedily. She turned back around and continued the crawl. The incline increased. She was climbing now, dragging her own body weight plus the 50-pound weapon up a 20-degree slope. Her muscles burned with lactic acid. The heat was making her dizzy, black spots dancing in her vision. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a small junction box. Not a room, just a slightly larger cubic space where 3 vents met. She pulled herself into it, curling into a ball to relieve the tension in her spine. Through the vent to her left, she heard it. Voices. Sound traveled strangely in the pipes, but this was close. She crawled toward the left grate, moving with the slow deliberation of a predator. Through the slats of the vent cover, she saw light. She peered through. Below her, maybe 10 feet down, was a locker room. 2 men in unauthorized military fatigues were smoking, their rifles propped against a bench. They were laughing. Elara checked her wrist computer. She was deep inside the perimeter. She had bypassed the main gate. "Miller," she whispered, keying the mic. "I'm inside the hard structure. I have eyes on hostiles." Silence. "Miller, copy?" Static. Just a wash of white noise. She checked the signal strength. 0 bars. The rock and steel of the mountain had cut the link. She was completely cut off. No backup, no orders, no extraction. She looked at the grate. It was screwed shut from the outside. She wasn't getting out this way without noise. She looked at the tunnel continuing upward. It led toward the hum of heavy machinery. The generator room, or maybe the ventilation control. She had a choice. Try to kill these two and risk alerting the base, or push deeper into the unknown, hoping to find a better vantage point. Elara tightened the strap on her ankle. She pushed away from the light and crawled back into the dark. The deeper Elara crawled, the more the mountain seemed to breathe. It wasn't air. It was a rhythmic mechanical exhalation of superheated industrial waste. The tunnel had changed. The rusted steel gave way to smoother, galvanized metal, but the temperature spiked. Her wrist computer flashed a warning. Ambient temp, 50 °C. Core body temp rising. She was cooking in her own gear. Elara stripped off her gloves. Her hands were raw, blisters forming on her palms from the friction of dragging her body weight over thousands of rivets. She considered ditching the plate carrier vest to reduce bulk and heat, but dismissed the thought instantly. If she popped out into a firefight, that ceramic plate was the only thing stopping a 7.62 millimeter round. Mind over matter, she whispered, her tongue thick and dry. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. The mantra was hollow. Her vision was beginning to swim at the edges, a tunnel vision within the tunnel. The air was thin, tasting of ozone and burnt oil. Every breath felt like inhaling from a hairdryer. She reached a junction where the shaft split into a Y shape. There were no signs, no maps, just the deafening roar of massive turbines vibrating through the floor, shaking her bones. Left or right? She closed her eyes, forcing herself to focus through the headache that was splitting her skull. She licked a finger and held it up. The draft from the left was fierce and hot, an exhaust line. The draft from the right was slightly less violent, carrying a faint, recycled scent. Coolant? Air conditioning return? She chose right. The incline became vertical, a 10-foot rise in the shaft. Elara stared up at the sheer metal walls. For a normal-sized operator, this would be impossible. Shoulders simply wouldn't fit to shimmy up. For Elara, it was a chimney climb. She placed her back against one wall and her boots against the other. The rifle bag dangled below her, a 50-pound pendulum. She pushed. Her quads screamed. Her boots slipped on the slick metal, sending a jolt of panic through her chest. She jammed her knees outward, locking herself in place by sheer friction and willpower. 1 foot up, backslide, reset, push. It was a grueling inchworm ascent. Sweat poured into her eyes, blinding her. The salt stung, but she couldn't wipe it away. Her hands were occupied keeping her from falling backward into the dark. Halfway up, her boot slipped. She dropped a foot, the rifle case slamming against the metal wall with a resounding clang. Elara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She held her breath, listening. The vibration of the facility masked the sound. Hopefully. She didn't wait to find out. Driven by adrenaline, she scrambled the last few feet, hooking her arm over the lip of the upper level and hauling herself over. She collapsed on the flat metal floor of the horizontal shaft, gasping for air that wasn't there. She lay there for a full minute, her cheek pressed against the cooler metal. She needed water. She reached for the tube of her hydration bladder. It was warm, plasticky, and nearly empty. She took a conservative sip, letting the liquid wet her parched throat. "Get up, Vance. Miller isn't coming to carry you." She forced herself into a crouch. The tunnel here was wider, almost 20 inches. luxury. She crawled forward, the sound of the turbines fading, replaced by the murmur of human voices and the sterile hum of electronics. She saw light ahead, slatted, artificial, blue-white light. Elara approached the grate with the slow, deliberate movements of a spider. She peered through the slats. Below her was a corridor, not a maintenance hallway, but a primary artery. The floor was polished concrete. The walls were lined with server racks and thick cabling, and directly below the grate, 2 guards stood at attention, flanking a heavy blast door. They wore full tactical gear, body armor, helmets, suppressed rifles. This wasn't just a guard post. This was the entrance to something vital. Elara checked the angle. If she opened the grate, she would drop right on top of them. She looked at her hands. They were trembling slightly. Tremors were bad for a sniper. But right now, she wasn't a sniper. She was an assassin in a ventilation shaft, and the only way forward was down. She reached for her combat knife, the blade dark and non-reflective. 2 targets, close quarters. Surprise is total. She took a deep breath, holding it to steady her hands. Then, she reached for the latch of the grate. The grate was held in place by 4 Phillips head screws. Elara stared at them through the slats, her heart rate forcibly slowed by years of breathing drills. If they were seized with rust, the noise of forcing them would echo like a gunshot in the quiet corridor. She drew her multi-tool, unfolding the screwdriver bit. She tested the first screw. It gave way with a silent, yielding grit. She exhaled a microscopic breath. 1. Below, the guards were bored. One was leaning against the heavy blast door, picking at his fingernails. The other was pacing a short 3-meter circle, his boots squeaking faintly on the polished concrete. They were relaxed, complacent. They believed the threat was outside, pinned down by machine gun fire at the main gate. They had no idea the threat was currently 6 feet above their heads, unscrewing the ceiling. 2. 3. Elara paused as the pacing guard walked directly underneath her. She could see the top of his helmet, the radio wire coiling down his neck. He stopped, adjusting his sling. If he looked up now, he would see the shadow of her face pressed against the metal. He didn't. He turned and walked back toward his partner. 4. Elara removed the last screw, catching it in her gloved hand before it could fall. Now, only gravity held the grate in place. She had a problem. The CWO2. The rifle was too long to bring down with her in a jump. It would bang against the frame or get tangled in her legs. She had to leave it in the vent, drop, clear the room, and then retrieve it. It was a terrifying gamble. Without the rifle, she was just a small woman with a knife against 2 men wearing body armor. She unbuckled the drag bag from her ankle and shoved it silently backward into the dark tunnel. She shifted her weight, positioning her feet on the frame of the opening. She gripped the grate with her left hand, her right hand tightening around the hilt of her K-bar combat knife. The blade was 7 inches of matte black high-carbon steel. She waited for the pacer to turn his back. Now. Elara pushed the grate up and to the side, sliding it onto the floor of the vent. In the same motion she dropped. She fell 10 feet. It wasn't a superhero landing. She absorbed the impact with her entire body, her knees bending deep, her left hand slapping the concrete to stabilize. There was a dull thud, no louder than a dropped book. The guard leaning against the door, Target 1, looked up, eyes widening in confusion. He saw a small, dark shape uncoiling from the floor. He opened his mouth to shout. Elara didn't give him the breath. She lunged. She didn't go for his head. He was wearing a helmet. She didn't go for his chest. He was wearing a plate carrier. She drove her shoulder into his solar plexus, using her upward momentum to drive him back against the steel door. As he wheezed, paralyzed by the impact, she drove the knife upward into the soft gap of his armpit, seeking the axillary artery. It was a wet, muffled punch. Target 1 slumped instantly, his legs turning to jelly. The second guard, Target 2, spun around. He was huge, easily 6'2", with a thick beard. He saw his partner sliding down the wall and the small figure standing over him. Reaction time kicked in. He raised his AK-74. Elara was already moving. She was too close for him to aim, but he swung the rifle barrel like a club. It connected with her shoulder, a glancing blow that still sent a shockwave of pain down her arm. She grunted, but used the force of the blow to spin, dropping her center of gravity. She was inside his guard now, too low for him to grapple effectively. She slashed across his thigh, the femoral artery. A spray of bright red arterial blood painted the gray wall. The guard roared, a sound that started as a scream but turned into a gurgle as he collapsed to one knee, clutching his leg. He tried to reach for his sidearm. Elara stepped inside his reach, grabbed the handle of his tactical vest, and yanked him forward off balance. As his face came down to her level, she reversed her grip on the knife and drove it into the side of his neck, just below the jawline. He seized up, then went limp. Elara guided his heavy body to the floor, ensuring his gear didn't clatter against the concrete. Silence returned to the corridor. It had taken 7 seconds. Elara stood over the bodies, her chest heaving. Her hands were slick with blood that wasn't hers. She looked at her reflection in the glass of a fire extinguisher case nearby. Her face was smeared with soot from the vent and blood spatter. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like a nightmare. "Status. Clear," she whispered to herself. She dragged the bodies into a nearby janitor's closet, stacking them unceremoniously amidst the mops and buckets. She wiped the blood from the floor with a rag found in the closet, erasing the evidence as best she could. It wasn't perfect, but in the dim emergency lighting, it would pass a casual glance. She returned to underneath the vent. This was the hard part. She jumped, grabbing the lip of the vent. She couldn't pull herself up. Not easily. She had to kick off the wall, scramble, and hook her leg. It was an undignified struggle, but she managed to reach back into the darkness and grab the drag strap of the rifle case. She pulled the 50-pound case down. It hit the floor with a heavy thump that made her wince. Elara knelt beside the case and unzipped it. She assembled the massive weapon rapidly, her fingers flying over the familiar mechanics. The barrel alone was nearly as long as her leg. She checked the optics. 0 held. She slung the rifle over her back. It was cumbersome, the barrel extending well past her head and the stock hitting her calves. But she couldn't leave it behind. She checked the dead guard's wrist for a keycard. She found one on Target 2. She approached the heavy blast door. The keypad glowed red. She swiped the blood-stained card. Beep! The light turned green. The hydraulic locks hissed. Elara took a deep breath, gripped her pistol, the rifle was useless in these tight corridors, and pushed the door open. 2 down. 22 confirmed hostiles remaining inside the structure, and Miller was still dying outside. The blast door opened not into a hallway, but onto a mezzanine overlooking a cavernous server farm. The air here was aggressively conditioned, chilled to a sterile 16 degrees Celsius to protect the banks of humming electronics below. The noise was a constant, low-frequency drone, like the buzzing of a billion angry wasps. Elara crouched low behind the railing, scanning the floor. Rows of black monoliths, server racks, stretched out in perfect geometric lines. At the far end of the room, behind a wall of glass, was the Security Operations Center, SOC. She raised her optics. Through the glass, she could see a wall of monitors. Her stomach tightened. The screens displayed live feeds from the perimeter cameras. On the center screen, she saw them. The SEALs were huddled behind a crumbled stone wall, pinned down not just by infantry, but by two automated sentry guns mounted on the gate towers. The turrets swiveled with terrifying robotic precision, spitting bursts of heavy-caliber fire every time a SEAL tried to peek. She saw Miller dragging a limp body, Viper 3, deeper into cover. The dust around them was kicking up in violent spurts. They were being chewed to pieces. "Hang on," Elara whispered, the words lost in the drone of the fans. She couldn't hack the system. She was a sniper, not a cyber warfare specialist. But every system needed power. Her eyes traced the thick orange cables running along the ceiling. They all fed into a caged enclosure in the corner of the room. The Power Distribution Unit, PDU. She moved. Keeping to the shadows of the mezzanine, she descended the metal staircase, her boots silent on the grating. The chatak on her back was a heavy, awkward burden, the barrel clinking softly against the railing once. She froze. Below, a technician in a white lab coat walked past the aisle, carrying a tablet. He was flanked by a guard with a submachine gun slung lazily across his chest. They didn't look up. They were too confident in their fortress. Elara waited for them to turn the corner, then sprinted across the gap between the server rows. She pressed her back against a hot server rack, feeling the vibration of the hard drive spinning against her spine. She was 50 meters from the PDU cage. She checked her vest. She had 2 blocks of C4 plastic explosive and 2 M112 clackers, enough to cut the power, but she had to get close. She moved in bursts, sprint, cover, check, sprint, cover. She reached the PDU cage. It was locked with a simple padlock. Elara didn't waste time picking it. She used her bolt cutters, slicing through the shackle with a sharp snap. She slipped inside. The hum here was deafening, the air crackling with static electricity. Massive breakers the size of suitcases lined the wall. She molded the C4 onto the main bus bar, the thick copper plate that distributed electricity to the entire facility. She jammed the detonator into the soft, white putty. 30 seconds, she thought. Give yourself 30 seconds to get clear. She set the timer. The red LED blinked. 30, 29. She turned to leave the cage and froze. Standing right in front of the cage door, staring directly at her, was the technician she had seen earlier. He had come back. For a second, neither of them moved. The technician looked at the small woman in the oversized combat gear, his eyes traveling from the mud-caked boots to the bloody knife sheath, and finally, to the massive rifle barrel rising behind her head like a totem. He dropped his tablet. It shattered on the floor. "Hey!" he screamed. "Intruder! Power room!" The guard around the corner spun around. "Damn it!" Elara hissed. She didn't have 30 seconds anymore. She didn't even have 3. The guard raised his weapon. Elara drew her suppressed pistol, leveling it through the wire mesh of the cage. She double-tapped. Foot. The technician scrambled back, falling over his own feet. The guard took a round to the chest plate, stumbled, and began to spray fire blindly. Bullets sparked off the cage, sending jagged metal flying. Stealth was gone. The element of surprise was dead. Elara looked at the C4 timer. 22 seconds. She couldn't wait. If the guard hit the explosives with a stray bullet while she was this close, she would be vaporized. But she couldn't leave the cage under fire. She made a choice. "Miller, heads down!" she screamed into the dead radio, praying the physics of the explosion would be signal enough. She kicked the cage door open, diving out and rolling behind a server rack, just as the guard's burst tore through the space she had occupied. She scrambled on hands and knees, keeping her head low as bullets shredded the servers above her, sending sparks and plastic shards raining down. "Security! Level 4! Contact!" The PA system blared, voices shouting in a foreign tongue. Elara reached into her pouch and pulled the manual override for the detonator. She didn't need the timer. She curled into a ball, covering her ears, opening her mouth to equalize the pressure. She squeezed the clacker. Boom. The world turned white. The concussion wave slammed Elara against the floor. The sound wasn't a noise. It was a physical blow. Then, darkness. The lights died. The hum of the servers died. The screaming of the technician died. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, the emergency red lighting flickered on, bathing the destroyed server room in a hellish crimson glow. Elara shook her head, clearing the ringing in her ears. She checked her limbs, still attached. Outside, the automated turrets would be dead. The seals had their window. But inside, Elara was now trapped in the dark, with every soldier in the facility coming for her. She stood up, dusting the debris off her rifle. "Come and get me," she whispered. The door to the server room burst open, not by Elara's hand, but by the shock wave of a breaching charge from the other side. Debris sprayed inward. Elara was already moving, sliding across the polished floor like a baseball player stealing home, putting a heavy rack of hard drives between her and the entrance. "Clear! Go, go, go!" Voices shouted in Arabic, aggressive and disciplined. Boots thundered into the room. Tactical lights cut through the red emergency gloom, sweeping the smoke-filled air. They were hunting her. And in this enclosed space, with a 50-inch sniper rifle strapped to her back, she was a clumsy prey. She needed space. She needed distance. Elara scrambled toward the rear maintenance exit. She hit the crash bar, spilling out into a long, narrow service corridor. It was a kill zone. Concrete walls, no cover, 70 meters of straight line. At the far end, a door swung open. 3 hostiles stepped out, blocking her path. Behind her, the squad from the server room was exiting, boxed in. "Contact! Corridor!" The shout echoed off the concrete. Elara didn't freeze. Panic was a luxury for people who expected to live forever. She dropped to her knees, but not to surrender. She unclipped a flashbang from her belt, pulled the pin, and didn't throw it. She rolled it. The canister skittered across the floor toward the 3 men ahead of her, like a bowling ball. They saw it coming. They looked down. That was the mistake. Bang! The flash was blinding, searing the retinas even through closed eyelids. The concussion overpressured the narrow hallway, a thunderclap that sucked the air out of the lungs. The 3 men staggered, hands flying to their ears, screaming. Elara was already sprinting, not away from them, but at them. She closed the distance in seconds. With her rifle useless on her back, she gripped her Sig Sauer P226 with both hands. First target. He was stumbling blindly, rifle pointed at the ceiling. Elara fired twice. Pop, pop. 2 rounds to the chest plate? No, he was armored. She adjusted instantly. Pop. 1 to the pelvic girdle. He collapsed. Pop. 1 to the head as he fell. Second target. He was swinging his AK wildly. Elara actually slid on the slick concrete, passing under his barrel. She was so low, so small, that she vanished from his peripheral vision. She fired upward into his chin. He dropped like a stone. Third target. He was recovering, blinking through the tears. He saw her. He raised his weapon. Elara didn't have the angle. She dove forward, tackling him around the knees. It was a mismatch in weight. He was twice her size, but momentum was on her side. He fell backward, his rifle clattering away. Elara scrambled up his chest like a feral cat, jamming the muzzle of her pistol into the gap of his helmet visor. Click. Slide lock. Empty, the soldier roared, grabbing her throat with a massive gloved hand. He squeezed. Elara's vision spotted. She couldn't breathe. She flailed, her boots unable to find purchase on the slick floor. She let go of the empty pistol. She reached for the knife on her vest. She couldn't reach it. His grip was pinning her gear. She did the only thing left. She jammed her thumbs into his eyes. It was brutal, primal, and devoid of any military finesse. The man screamed, his grip loosening just enough. Elara gasped, sucking in air, and ripped her knife free. She ended it. She rolled off him, gasping, coughing violently. Her throat felt crushed. She checked her neck. Nothing broken, but the bruising would be hideous. "Searching! Level 3 corridor!" Voices from behind. The server room squad was catching up. Elara scrambled to her feet. She retrieved her pistol, reloaded with a fresh magazine, and looked for an exit. There was none. Just the elevator shaft at the end of the hall. The doors were pried open, revealing a dark, empty void. The car was floors above. The footsteps were getting louder. She looked at the elevator doors. Then she looked at the gap between the open doors and the floor. There was a small maintenance crawl space under the lip of the shaft entrance. A cable run, barely 10 inches high, covered by a loose metal plate. No full-grown man would even consider it hiding spot. It looked like a rat hole. Elara kicked the plate loose. She threw her rifle bag in first, then slithered inside, pulling the plate back into place just as the beam of a tactical light swept over the elevator doors. She lay flat in the dusty darkness, her nose pressed against high-voltage cables. "Where did she go?" A voice growled, right above her head. Heavy boots stomped on the metal plate she was hiding under. Dust rained down on her face. She held her breath, her heart beating so hard she thought it would vibrate the floor. She must have gone down the shaft. "Shine the light down." "I see nothing." "Check the stairwell." The boots moved away. The voices faded. Elara exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. She was alive, but she was trapped in a cable run, underneath an elevator shaft, with 24 kills to her name and a team of SEALs still waiting for a miracle outside. She checked her altimeter. She needed to go up, to the nest, the highest point in the facility. She looked at the bundle of thick, grease-slicked elevator cables hanging in the shaft next to her. "Going up," she whispered to the darkness. The elevator shaft was a throat of concrete and steel, stretching up into a darkness that smelled of hydraulic fluid and ozone. Elara stood on the narrow lip of the maintenance hatch, looking up. The cables, thick, braided steel ropes coated in years of black grease, disappeared into the void above. According to her mental schematic of the facility, the observation deck, the nest, was 12 stories up. That was roughly 40 meters of vertical climb. 40 meters, with a 50-pound rifle strapped to her back. "Easy day," she whispered, the irony dry as dust in her bruised throat. She adjusted the CWO2 M200. She tightened the straps of the drag bag until they dug into her shoulders, ensuring the weapon wouldn't swing wildly and knock her off balance. She checked her gloves. The leather palms were already shredded from the vent crawl, but they would have to hold. Elara reached out and grabbed the nearest cable. It was slick, disgusting. Her hand slid down 2 inches before friction took hold. She jumped, her boots clamped around the cable, the spikes of the tread biting into the grease-caked steel. She hung there for a second, testing the tension. The cable hummed, a low vibration indicating the car was docked somewhere far above. She began to climb. Reach, pull, lock legs, push. It was a rhythm of agony. Her biceps burned immediately. The weight of the rifle felt like a hand pressing her down, gravity demanding its due. Every time she pulled herself up, the rifle bag scraped against the other cables, creating a metallic zing that echoed in the shaft, like a plucked violin string. First floor passed, then the second. By the 5th floor, the sweat was stinging her eyes again. The grease from the cable had coated her gloves, making them treacherous. She had to squeeze harder, her forearms cramping into knots of rock-hard muscle. Don't look down. She looked down. The bottom of the shaft was a distant black square. If she slipped, she wouldn't just fall, she would slide. The friction would strip the flesh from her hands before she hit the bottom and shattered every bone in her body. "Focus, Vance," she hissed. Above her, a mechanical clunk echoed. The cable shuddered. Elara froze, hugging the steel rope. The elevator car, someone had called it. The cable she was holding jerked upward. Not fast, but steady. The counterweight was moving. She wasn't climbing anymore, she was riding. But if the cable went up, the counterweight went down, or vice versa. She frantically tried to remember the mechanics of this specific lift system. She looked up. A massive, dark shape was descending toward her rapidly. The counterweight block. It was sliding down the guide rails, silent and deadly. She was on the wrong cable. She was in its path. Shit! She unlocked her legs and swung wildly, suspended by just her hands over the abyss. She kicked out, her boot finding the guide rail of the adjacent car. She threw her body weight across the gap, lunging for the service ladder bolted to the concrete wall, a ladder she hadn't seen in the darkness until now. Her right hand caught a rung. Her left hand slipped from the greasy cable. For a heart-stopping second, she swung by one arm, the 50 pounds of rifle wrenching her shoulder socket with a sickening pop. She gasped, tears springing to her eyes, but she didn't let go. She slammed her other hand onto the rung and hauled herself onto the ladder just as the multi-ton counterweight rushed past her, a silent monolith of wind and steel. It missed her by inches. The wind of its passing tugged at her clothes. Elara clung to the ladder, shaking uncontrollably. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening heat. She rotated the arm. It clicked, not dislocated, but strained. "Move," she commanded herself. "Miller is dying." She resumed the climb on the ladder. It was easier than the cable, but slower. The rungs were rusted, groaning under her weight. Floor 8, floor 9, floor 10. The air grew colder. The smell of industrial grease faded, replaced by the biting chill of the mountain night seeping in from above. She reached the top of the shaft, the motor room. Light spilled through the grating of the floor above. She could hear the massive winch motors humming. Elara pushed the trapdoor open with her good shoulder. She pulled herself up onto the metal grating of the machine room floor. She didn't stop to rest. She found the exterior access door. It was heavy, steel, aimed at withstanding mountain storms. She threw the latch and kicked it open. The wind hit her like a physical blow. It was howling, carrying snow and ice. She stepped out onto the catwalk. She was at the top of the processing tower, the highest point in the valley, the nest. Below her, the battle was a map of tragedy. Flares popped in the darkness, illuminating the chaos. The SEALs had breached the gate thanks to her blackout, but they were bogged down in the courtyard. Tracers crisscrossed the night like angry fireflies. She could see the muzzle flashes of enemy snipers positioned on the lower rooftops, picking the team apart. Elara unslung the rifle case. Her hands were shaking from the cold and the exertion, but as soon as she touched the cold polymer of the CWO2, the tremors stopped. It was muscle memory. It was who she was. She unzipped the case, extracted the weapon, and deployed the bipod on the icy railing of the catwalk. She lay prone on the freezing metal, the cold seeping instantly through her torn uniform. She pressed her eye to the scope. The world snapped into focus. Green phosphor clarity. She saw a shooter on a balcony, lining up a shot on a SEAL who was dragging a wounded comrade. "Miller," she said into the comms, praying the altitude gave her a line of sight for the radio signal. "Viper 1, this is support. I am at the nest. I have the deck. Static." Then, a voice, disbelief coloring the ragged tone. "Vance, you're alive?" "Confirmed," she said, dialing the elevation turret. "Keep your heads down, I'm cleaning house." She exhaled. The reticle settled on the enemy sniper's chest. Crack. The sound of the .408 round leaving the barrel was thunderous, a roar that announced the arrival of a god. Down below, the enemy sniper simply ceased to exist. 1, she counted. The bolt of the CWO2 M200 intervention slid back with a heavy, oiled precision, ejecting the spent brass casing. It spun in the freezing air, landing on the metal grating with a hollow clink that was immediately lost in the wind. Elara didn't blink. Her eye remained welded to the scope, her world reduced to a circle of green phosphor and crosshairs. "Splash 1, she murmured, her voice flat. Adjusting for angle, high-angle fire aiming low. From her vantage point 12 stories up, the courtyard of the Obsidian Ridge complex was laid out like a chessboard. The SEALs were the pawns, huddled behind concrete barriers, pinned down by a relentless crossfire. The enemy were the rooks and knights, positioned on the lower rooftops and in fortified bunkers, raining death downward. But Elara was the queen, and she had the whole board in her sights. "Viper 1, this is support. Threat profile updated. Heavy machine gun, east sector, second floor balcony. He's chewing up your cover." "Take him out, Vance." Miller's voice was ragged, strained by pain. "I took a fragment in the leg. We can't move." "Stand by." Elara shifted the massive rifle. The bipod dug into the icy rail. Through the thermal overlay, the gunner was a bright white shape against the cold gray of the building. He was hidden behind sandbags, invisible to the SEALs on the ground. But from above, he was naked. She exhaled, watching the vapor of her breath dissipate. She accounted for the steep 40-degree downward angle. Gravity acted differently on a bullet traveling vertically. If she aimed dead on, she would shoot high. She dialed the turret down 2 clicks. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil punched her shoulder, a familiar bruising kiss. The muzzle brake vented the gas sideways, kicking up a cloud of snow from the catwalk. Down below, the heavy machine gun fell silent abruptly. The white shape on her screen collapsed backward, misting the wall behind him with heat. "Target down," Elara reported, scanning west. Good kill, Viper 2 shouted. "Moving up." "Negative, Viper 2. Hold position. You have an RPG team maneuvering on your left flank. 3 packs." Elara cycled the bolt again. Clack, clack. A fresh 408 round, solid copper and lathe-turned for aerodynamic perfection, slid into the chamber. The RPG team was sprinting through the shadows, using the confusion to flank the pinned seals. They paused at the corner of a supply depot, the gunner raising the tube to his shoulder. He had a clear shot at the cluster of seals. Elara didn't wait for the perfect breath cycle. She fired on the snap. The bullet struck the RPG gunner in the center of mass. The kinetic energy of the heavy round didn't just kill him, it threw him. He was lifted off his feet and slammed into the man behind him. The rocket-propelled grenade dropped from his hands, unfired. RPG neutral, Elara said. Cycle targets. It became a rhythm, a deadly mechanical waltz. Identify, calculate, fire, cycle, identify, calculate, fire, cycle. Elara was no longer a person. She was a ballistic computer made of flesh and bone. She felt no recoil, heard no noise. She simply removed obstacles. A sniper on the water tower? Gone. A squad trying to reinforce the main door? Broken before they could cross the open ground. Down in the courtyard, the dynamic shifted. The SEALs, realizing the finger of God was intervening on their behalf, began to move. They bounded forward, their suppressed carbines clearing the stunned survivors. "Vance, we are at the breach point," Miller yelled. "Cover our entry." "I have the door," Elara replied. "Zone is clear. You are green." She watched as the SEALs stacked up on the heavy blast door, the same door she had bypassed an hour ago. They blew the hinges with a breaching charge. Dust billowed. They stormed inside. Elara kept her scope trained on the entrance, waiting for a straggler, a flanker. But nothing moved. The courtyard was littered with the bodies of the men she had killed. From this height, they looked like discarded toys. "Support, this is Viper 1, Miller's voice came over the comms, clearer now that he was inside the structure. "We are in. Secure." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. "Vance." Miller's voice changed. The urgency was gone, replaced by something else. Shock. Did you come through the north hallway?" Elara rubbed her aching shoulder. "Affirmative. Came up the elevator shaft." "Jesus Christ," Miller breathed. "There are bodies everywhere down here, knife work, close range. You did this?" "I had to clear my route," Elara said simply. "Do you have the HVT?" "We're pushing to the office now. But Vance, there's nobody left to fight. You gutted the interior security." Elara didn't feel pride. She felt cold. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the shivering reality of the freezing wind on the tower. "Just get the target, Miller. I'm freezing my tits off up here." "Copy that. Breaching the main office in 3, 2, 1. Elara watched the thermal signature of the explosion blow out the windows of the top-floor office below her. She waited for the call. She waited for the jackpot code word. Instead, Miller shouted, "Empty! The room is empty! Secure the files!" "What do you mean, empty?" Elara pressed her headset tighter to her ear. "He's gone. Coffee is still hot. Computer is scrubbed. Rabbit Ed." Elara swung her rifle traverse, scanning the back of the complex. The valley floor stretched out behind the facility, a long, winding road leading toward the border. "Viper 1, I have motion, rear sector." She adjusted her focus. Far away, moving fast on the dirt road, was a convoy. 3 heavily armored SUVs kicking up a trail of dust that was barely visible in the moonlight. "He's running," Elara said, her stomach dropping. 3 vehicles. Estimated speed 80 clicks. They are leaving the kill box. "Can you stop them?" Miller asked. Elara ranged the lead vehicle. The laser rangefinder flashed a number that made her blood run cold. 2,800 meters, and they were moving away. They are pushing 3 clicks, Miller, and opening. We can't catch them, Miller said, desperation creeping back in. We have no air assets. If he crosses that ridge, he's in neutral territory. We lose him forever. Elara looked at the retreating taillights. They were tiny red pinpricks in the vast darkness. Vance, Miller said, his voice low. Can you take the shot? Elara looked at her ballistic computer. The numbers were scrolling fast. Distance increasing. Wind variable. Coriolis effect significant at this range. Spin drift. Temperature. Humidity. It wasn't a shot. It was a math equation from hell. He's getting out of range, she whispered. Take the shot, Elara, Miller yelled, using her first name for the first time. Take the shot or the mission fails. She didn't answer. She lay prone, settling her cheek against the freezing stock. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, visualizing the bullet's flight. 3.8 kilometers to the ridgeline. Spot me, she said. The convoy was a snake of dust and shadows, slithering away into the safety of the mountain pass. Through the high magnification scope, the 3 SUVs were bouncing violently over the rutted track, but their speed was undeniable. They were fleeing, putting distance between themselves and the slaughter at the base with every second. Range mark, Elara barked, her voice tight. 3,200 meters, Miller called out from the office below, watching the same feed she was seeing, or perhaps spotting through a window with binoculars. They are hitting the straightaway. 3.2 kilometers, 2 miles. At that distance, a bullet was no longer a projectile. It was a glider. It would have to arch high into the sky, crossing through multiple wind layers, fighting air density and gravity before plunging back down to Earth. I can't hit a moving target at 3 clicks, Miller, Elara said, her hands adjusting the elevation turret with frantic precision. The flight time is too long. By the time the round gets there, they'll be 50 meters down the road. Aim for the engine block. Disable the lead vehicle. It's armored. A standard round will splash. Use the Raufoss. You have the MK211s, don't you? Elara froze. The MK211 Raufoss. High explosive incendiary armor piercing. She had 1 magazine of them. 5 rounds. Loading AP, she said, ripping the standard magazine out and slapping the specialized one in. The metallic clack was loud in the silence of the tower. She cycled the bolt. The lead SUV was the target. If she stopped that, the others would be forced to halt or go off-road, slowing them down. She centered the crosshairs. She had to lead the target. At this distance and at their speed, she had to aim at empty space, yards ahead of the car. Wind call? She asked. 5 miles per hour, west to east at ground level, gusting to 10 at the ridge. Copy, she adjusted. She pushed her breath out, emptying her lungs until there was nothing left. Her heart rate slowed. Thump, thump, thump. She squeezed. Boom! The rifle bucked violently. Elara rode the recoil, keeping her eye open. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. The bullet arched through the night sky. 5 seconds. On the ground, far in the distance, a puff of dirt erupted. Miss! Miller shouted. Behind them! You were late! Time of flight is nearly 6 seconds, Miller. They accelerated. Elara snarled, racking the bolt. I need a constant speed. They aren't going to give you a constant speed, Vance. They are running for their lives. The convoy was nearing a bend in the road. Once they passed that curve, they would be shielded by the rock face until they hit the border crossing. This was it. The window was closing. Range? 3,500. They are pushing it. Elara bit her lip until she tasted blood. 3,500 meters. That was beyond the maximum effective range of the weapon. That was world record territory, and she had to hit a moving truck. I'm taking the rear vehicle, she decided. If I hit the lead, the others will just drive around. If I hit the rear, maybe the wreckage blocks the road? No, that's stupid. She watched the cars. The lead vehicle was the VIP. It had to be. The convoy hit the start of the incline. They slowed down. Just a fraction. They're slowing for the turn, Elara noted. Range mark. 3,600. She adjusted the elevation. The turret clicked, a sound of mechanical finality. She was dialing in so much drop that she was practically aiming at the moon to hit the earth. Holding for wind, she whispered. The flags on the tower were whipping left. The trees down in the valley were still. The wind was shearing, she had to guess. She had to feel it. She shifted the crosshair lead. 2 car lengths ahead. 3. Sending it. Boom. The second Raufoss round left the barrel. Elara watched. The tracer burned a faint red streak in the darkness, arching high, hanging in the air like a dying star. It began its descent. It fell. Ideally. Perfectly. It struck the rear bumper of the lead SUV, a flash of light. The high-explosive tip detonated, but the car didn't stop. The armor absorbed the blow. The SUV swerved slightly, then corrected. Impact! But no effect, Miller groaned. It bounced off the plating. I need a window shot, Elara said, panic rising in her throat. I have to put it through the glass. At 3.8 kilometers? You're dreaming. They're almost at the ridge, Miller. Give me the range. 3,800. Last chance, Vance. They are crossing the line. The convoy was seconds away from disappearing behind the mountain spur. Elara closed her eyes for a microsecond. She visualized the bullet. She visualized the spin. She visualized the air density. She opened her eyes. The world was cold, sharp, and mathematical. She didn't aim for the car. She aimed for the darkness ahead of the car, at a specific point in space where the driver's head would be in 6.2 seconds. Don't miss, she whispered. She pulled the trigger. The bullet hit the asphalt. 6.2 seconds after Elara pulled the trigger, a cloud of pulverized rock and tar erupted, 3 feet behind the rear bumper of the lead SUV. Miss! Miller's voice cracked over the comms, heavy with exhaustion and defeat. Impact rear! You missed Vance! The convoy didn't swerve this time. They didn't slow down. They simply drove on, their taillights fading as they rounded the bend of the mountain spur, disappearing behind a wall of granite. That's it, Miller spat. They're gone. They are behind hard cover. Mission failed on the HVT. Elara didn't reply. She didn't lift her head from the stock. Her eye remained open, staring at the empty road where the car had been. The cold wind bit at her exposed skin, freezing the sweat on her neck, but she felt burning hot. Pack it up, Vance, Miller ordered, his tone shifting to tactical retreat. We have enemy QRF approaching from the south. We need to move to the extraction point now. Don't waste the ammo. He has to cross the saddle, Elara said. Her voice was barely a whisper, lost in the wind, but the radio picked it up. What? The road, Elara said, her mind racing through the topographic map she had memorized hours ago. It winds behind the spur, but it cuts back across the saddle of the ridge. He'll be exposed again. For 4 seconds. Vance, look at your range card, Miller shouted. The saddle is 4,000 meters away. That's 2.5 miles. The effective range of that weapon is 2,000. You are trying to shoot double the manufacturer's limit. Atmosphere is thin, Elara murmured, ignoring him. She pulled a small notebook from her sleeve pocket, flipping it open with numb fingers. It was filled with handwritten dope charts, ballistic data she had calculated herself for extreme conditions. Air density is low. Drag is reduced. The bullet will fly flatter. It's impossible! Physics doesn't work like that! It does if you do the math right. Elara racked the bolt. The empty casing from the missed shot clattered onto the grating. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a single round. It looked different from the others. She had hand-loaded it herself, polishing the solid copper projectile until it shone like gold. She loaded it into the chamber. Vance, I am giving you a direct order. Miller sounded angry now, the authority of a master chief trying to crush the insubordination of a support specialist. Stand down. We are leaving. If you fire that weapon, you are giving away our position to the incoming QRF for nothing. Elara tuned him out. She tuned out the wind. She tuned out the pain in her shoulder. She focused on the saddle of the ridge. It was a tiny notch in the skyline, barely visible against the stars. Distance, 3,850 meters. Elevation drop. The bullet would drop over 350 feet over that distance. Time of flight, estimated 7.4 seconds. Earth rotation. At this extreme range, the Coriolis effect was no longer a theory. It was a wall. The Earth would literally rotate underneath the bullet while it was in the air. Since she was shooting north, the target would move slightly right relative to the projectile. She had to aim left. Then there was spin drift. The bullet spinning to the right would naturally drift right. Left for Coriolis, left for spin drift, left for the wind. She dialed the windage turret. Click, click, click. She turned it so far it felt like she was unscrewing the cap, then the elevation. She dialed the scope up until the barrel was pointed visibly upward, like a mortar. She wouldn't even see the target in the center of the scope. She would have to use the very bottom hash mark of the reticle. Vance! Miller was screaming now. Silence on the net, Elara said. Her voice was ice. I need silence. Miller stopped. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the sheer audacity. Elara settled her breathing. She wasn't aiming at the road. She was aiming at a patch of snow on the peak above the saddle. A phantom point in the sky where the math said the bullet needed to be to fall onto the target that wasn't there yet. She watched the edge of the granite spur. She waited for the headlights. 1 second, 2 seconds. A beam of light cut the darkness. The lead SUV emerged, climbing the final grade to the saddle. It was moving slower now, struggling against the incline. Target visible, she whispered. She didn't track the car. She kept her crosshairs frozen on the patch of snow above the road. She waited for the car to drive into her mental trap. She had to fire before the car reached the kill spot. She had to fire 7 seconds before the car was there. She watched the speed. She did the mental calculus. Speed over distance. Time of flight. The SUV passed a scrub bush. That was her mark. Now. She didn't jerk the trigger. She squeezed it, pulling straight back with the pad of her finger, letting the brake surprise her. The recoil of the 408 Chetak was a violent shove, driving the bipod legs back into the ice on the grating. A cloud of unburnt powder and snow puffed out from the muzzle brake, momentarily obscuring the scope. Elara didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She forced her eye to stay open, fighting the biological urge to flinch. Shot out, she whispered. The world went silent. On the radio, Miller was shouting something about breaking contact, about the approaching QRF, about wasting time. But Elara didn't hear him. She was in the void. 1,000. The bullet, a solid copper projectile traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, screamed out of the barrel. But almost immediately, the air began to fight it. Drag clawed at its velocity. Gravity reached up to pull it down, 1,000. The bullet was climbing. To hit a target nearly 4 kilometers away, the round had to arc drastically. It rose higher and higher, soaring hundreds of feet above the valley floor. It flew over the burning wreckage of the courtyard, over the frozen river, over the tree line. "Vance, move your ass!" Miller yelled. "We are leaving!" 1,000. The bullet reached its apogee, the highest point of its flight path. The hump. For a split second, it hung suspended in the stratosphere of the valley, a tiny metal speck against the vastness of the mountains. Here the air was thinner. The crosswind from the western peaks pushed against it. The spin of the bullet drifted it to the right. The earth rotated beneath it to the east. 1,000. Now it began to fall. It wasn't flying anymore. It was plummeting. It accelerated downward, guided by the math Elara had etched into her notebook. Through her scope, Elara saw the SUV. It was still moving up the saddle. It looked safe. The driver had no idea that death had been launched 7 seconds ago and was currently raining down from the sky. 1,000. She missed, a SEAL voice muttered on the comms. "Let's go." "Wait," Miller said. His voice was different. He was watching the feed. 1,000. The bullet was now terminal. It was dropping at a steep angle, screaming down toward the road. The SUV crossed the shadow of the scrub bush Elara had used as a marker. 1,000. "Impact," Elara whispered. The MK211 Raufoss round struck the roof of the lead SUV. It didn't bounce this time. The plunging angle meant it hit the thinner armor of the roof perpendicular to the surface. The tungsten core punched through the steel, through the headliner, and into the passenger compartment. A fraction of a second later, the incendiary and high-explosive payload detonated inside the cabin. Crack-thoom. From 3.8 kilometers away, it looked like a magic trick. One moment, the SUV was driving. The next, the windows blew out in a violent spray of glass and fire. The vehicle swerved hard to the left, tires losing traction on the ice. It slammed into the rock face of the saddle, flipped onto its side, and slid for 50 meters, a burning sled of twisted metal. The other 2 SUVs in the convoy slammed on their brakes, skidding to a halt to avoid crashing into the burning wreck. "Target destroyed," Elara said. Her voice cracked. She realized she had been holding her breath for 10 seconds. Silence. Absolute stunned silence on the radio. Miller watched the thermal bloom of the burning car on his monitor. He looked at the range readout. 3,842 meters. "Good effect on target," Miller said. He sounded like he was in shock. "Jackpot is confirmed down. Convoy is neutralized." Elara let her head drop onto the stock of the rifle. Her hands were shaking so badly now that she couldn't feel her fingers. The adrenaline crash hit her like a physical blow. "Vance." Miller came back. His voice quiet, stripped of the arrogance, stripped of the rank. "How?" "Math," Elara croaked. "Just math, Master Chief." "Pack up," Miller said, clearing his throat. "Chopper is inbound. ETA 2 minutes. Get down here, Elf. We're going home." It was the first time he had used her call sign without a sneer. Elara stood up. Her legs were numb. The wind on the tower seemed to scream in frustration that it hadn't claimed her. She broke down the Chaytak with practiced efficiency, her frozen fingers fumbling slightly with the latches. She packed the barrel, the scope, the the bolt. The weight of the bag returned, 50 pounds of dead iron, but now it felt lighter. "QRF is breaching the south perimeter," Viper 2 called out. "We need to move to the LZ, now." "Vance, what's your ETA?" Miller asked. "Coming down," Elara replied. She didn't take the elevator shaft. She couldn't. Her arms were blown out. Instead, she took the external maintenance stairs, sliding down the railings, jumping the last few steps of each landing. It was reckless, but she was racing the headlights of the enemy troop trucks pouring into the valley. She reached the ground floor, bursting out of the heavy steel door into the courtyard she had cleared from above. The air here smelled of cordite, copper, and frozen blood. "LZ is the north lot," Miller commanded. "Move, move!" Elara sprinted. The snow was knee-deep in places. She was lagging, her short stride struggling against the drifts, the rifle case banging against her thighs. She rounded the corner of the main building and almost ran into Miller. The Master Chief was standing there, guarding the rear. But he wasn't looking at the enemy. He was looking at the janitor's closet door, which had swung open in the wind. Inside, the two bodies Elara had hidden, the giant guards with their throats slit, were sprawled in a grim heap. Miller looked at the bodies, massive men, Tier 1 gear, killed by a blade. He looked up as Elara slogged toward him. He looked at her small, shivering frame, barely coming up to his chest. He looked at the blood drying on her uniform, not her blood. "You cleared the vents?" Miller asked, his voice shouting over the rising sound of rotors. "I cleared the vents," Elara panted, stopping beside him. "And the server room?" "And the server room." Miller stared at her. For the first time, he didn't see a little girl. He saw a predator that could fit in places he couldn't and kill things he couldn't reach. A Pavehawk helicopter roared over the ridge, banking hard, its downdraft kicking up a blinding white storm of snow. The side gunners opened up with miniguns, suppressing the approaching enemy trucks. Brrrt! The sound was like canvas tearing. "Go! Get on the bird!" Miller grabbed the handle of her drag bag, not to carry her, but to help her heave it up the ramp. It was a gesture of assistance, not condescension. Elara scrambled into the cabin of the helicopter. The SEALs were already there, strapped in, looking exhausted and battered. They looked at her as she dragged the rifle case in. Viper 2, the one who had mocked her carry-on luggage, pulled his legs back to give her room. "Clear!" the crew chief yelled. The bird lifted, banking sharply away from the mountain. Elara slumped against the bulkhead, buckling her harness. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to conserve warmth. Miller sat opposite her. He plugged into the internal comms. "Status check," Miller said. "Viper 2, green. 3, walking wounded. 4, green." "Support?" Miller asked, looking directly at her. Elara keyed her mic. Her hand was trembling, but her voice was steady. "Support is green. Ammo is Winchester on the main gun." "Winchester?" Miller raised an eyebrow. "You fired all 20 rounds?" "No." Elara closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the vibrating metal of the fuselage. "I have one left, but I didn't need it." Miller looked out the window at the receding mountain fortress. It was shrinking, disappearing into the dark. "No," Miller muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I guess you didn't." The extraction flight was a blur of vibration and exhaustion. Elara didn't sleep, though her body screamed for it. She sat with her eyes open, staring at the red interior lights of the Pavehawk, her hand resting on the polymer case of the Chaytak. Across from her, the SEALs dozed or stared blankly at the floor. the adrenaline crash turning elite operators into tired men. When the wheels touched down on the tarmac of the forward operating base, it was dawn. The sky was bleeding a pale, bruised purple over the mountains they had just escaped. They offloaded in silence. The ground crew looked at them with that mix of awe and pity reserved for teams returning from the bad zones. Elara dragged her rifle case down the ramp. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, a reminder of the recoil that had defied physics. "Vance," Miller said, catching up to her as they walked toward the debriefing center. He looked rough, his face smeared with camo paint and dried blood from a cut on his forehead. "Leave the gear. The support staff will handle it. We need to go straight to the AAR." "I clean my own weapon, Master Chief," Elara said quietly, not breaking stride. Miller opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He nodded once. "Right. After the debrief, then." The debriefing room was sterile, air-conditioned, and smelled of stale coffee. A lieutenant commander sat behind a long table looking fresh and rested. He tapped a stylus on a tablet as the team filed in. Elara took a seat at the back, in the corner, trying to make herself invisible. The SEALs took the front row. "Welcome back," the commander said, his tone perfunctory. "We've reviewed the drone footage and the comms logs. It's a lot to process." He looked up, his eyes scanning the room. "We have a confirmed kill on the HVT. Vehicle destroyed at grid reference 44 Sierra. Distance from shooter estimated at 3,240 meters. The commander paused, looking over his glasses. "That's a typo, right? 3.8 kilometers? That's not a sniper shot. That's artillery range." The room was silent. The commander looked at Miller. "Master Chief, clarify. Who took the shot? Did you call in an airstrike and forget to log it?" Miller stood up. He looked tired, heavy. He turned slowly and looked at the back of the room, at the small woman sitting with her hands clasped in her lap, looking like she was waiting for a bus rather than discussing a world record engagement. "No airstrike, sir," Miller said, his voice gravelly. "The shot was taken by CWO2 Vance. 1 round, MK211 Raufoss, cold bore." The commander scoffed. "With a rifle, at night, on a moving target? Come on, Miller. I need the truth for the report, not a fish story." "It's the truth, sir." Viper 2 spoke up, surprising everyone. "I saw the trace. It flew for 6-7 seconds. It was goddamn magic." "It wasn't magic," Elara spoke from the corner. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the room. "It was ballistics, sir. Atmospheric density at that altitude allowed for a flatter trajectory. The target was moving into a predetermined kill box. It was a calculation." The commander stared at her. He looked at her size, her rank, her calm demeanor. He looked back at the data on his screen. "If this stands," the commander murmured, "it's the longest confirmed kill in history. It shatters the previous record. This is front-page Navy Times stuff. We'll need to set up a press release, verify the equipment." "No," Elara said. The commander blinked. "Excuse me, warrant officer?" "No press." Elara stood up. She picked up her cover. "I didn't take the shot for a record, sir. I took it because the mission required it. If you put my face on a magazine, I can't do my job. I'm a ghost. Let me stay one." She looked at Miller. "Permission to be dismissed to attend to my gear, Master Chief?" Miller looked at her for a long moment. There was a shift in his eyes, a dismantling of the prejudice that had defined the last 24 hours. He nodded. "Permission granted, Elara." She walked out of the room, leaving the stunned silence behind her. An hour later, Elara was alone in the armory. The room smelled of solvent and gun oil, a scent she found more comforting than fresh air. The CWO2 was disassembled on the bench in front of her. She wiped the carbon from the bolt face with a methodical, rhythmic motion. The door opened. Miller walked in. He had showered and changed, but he still looked weary. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "Command is going crazy," he said. "They don't know what to do with you. They want to give you a Navy Cross, but they don't know how to write the citation without admitting we sent a support tech into the vents alone." "I don't need a medal, Miller," Elara said, running a patch through the massive barrel. "I need more Raufoss rounds. I used my last one." Miller chuckled, a dry sound. He walked over and placed a small box on the bench. It was a fresh box of MK211 ammunition. "I pulled some strings," he said. He stood there for a moment, awkward. The silence stretched. "Listen, Vance," Miller started, looking at his boots. "About the beginning of the mission. What I said. About your size. About everything." Elara stopped wiping the bolt. She didn't look up. "You were worried about the mission, Miller. I get it. Big rifle, small girl. It doesn't look right on paper." "I was wrong," Miller said. He said it clearly, without qualification. "You saved my team. You saved the mission. You did things none of my guys could have done. Thank you." Elara finally looked up. Her gray eyes were calm, unreadable. "You don't need to thank me for doing my job," she said. "Just do me a favor. Anything." "Next time," Elara said, snapping the bolt back into the receiver with a sharp clack. "Don't ask me if I need a hand with my bag." Miller smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. He straightened up and offered her a salute. Not a perfunctory one, but a sharp, respectful salute normally reserved for superior officers. "Won't happen again, Vance." He turned and left the room. Elara watched him go. She didn't salute back. She wasn't an officer who cared about ceremony. She turned back to her rifle, checking the optics one last time. She was 4'11". She was a woman in a world of giants. She was the one they mocked until the shooting started. She zipped up the case, hoisted the 50-pound load onto her shoulder, and walked out into the night. The base was noisy, full of soldiers celebrating survival and victory. Elara walked past them, unnoticed, a shadow in the periphery. She didn't need the applause. The silence was where she worked best.